Imagine if there was a way that you could be more attractive with men without you having to do anything different, without you having to learn any clever lines, without you having to pretend to be someone that you're not, without you having to be worried about what a guy's thinking. Imagine if it just happened. And then imagine if it happened even when you weren't feeling it was happening. If it happened when you felt confident, if you happened when you felt unsure of yourself, if it happened when you were full of doubts. Well, as crazy as that sounds, I'm going to go through with you and explain to you the shadow method and how this works. And let me start with this is going to sound so weird and it's going to sound so counterintuitive. I was hesitant to bring it to you because normally I just do this with clients and I have to explain it and go through it. So if you don't know me, I'm Bob Grant. I'm a relationship expert. And I have been using this with clients for years. I stumbled upon it, probably a decade ago. And normally I have to get to know someone first, but I'm going to explain to you why attraction, especially this way of doing it, is something you can add to it, but it's deeper than just a technique. It's not something where you say 3 magic words. It's something that comes from within you. That's what we call it the shadow method. And women that have done this, I've heard stories, and these are all true, from women that were at Starbucks, just getting done with a workout and just not feeling real pretty or anything, and men offering them advice on which drink they should get and recommending that. And they're like telling me this. They said it's hilarious. It's like the guys are competing for their attention. One woman I'm going to tell you a story about comes out of church, this huge church, and men follow her out to ask for a phone number. I'm going to give you the details of that. And this applies to anyone, whether you're older, younger. It applies regardless of your beliefs in general. So you don't necessarily have to believe one thing or another. You don't have to be a really upbeat person, or you don't have to be really calm and quiet. It applies to everyone. But what it does require is that you are willing to be honest with yourself. Because if you're not willing to be honest, this won't work. So let's jump into and explain what this is. So the shadow is something Leonardo da Vinci, others have talked about. It is the part of you and me that we fear is true. Doesn't mean that it is. So for those that are older and have ever watched Cheers, the TV show, Cliffy, if you remember Cliffy was a know-it-all. He always had an answer for everything. Well, he would do this because his shadow is that he was stupid. He feared he was stupid. So therefore, to compensate for that, he would always have all the answers. He would read a lot, or he would study stuff, Trivial Pursuit, and all those things. It wasn't that he was stupid, but he feared he was. This is where it gets a little deeper. Your brain and mine, we all have a shadow or shadows, and it's the part of us we fear is true. And usually it comes from childhood or something that's happened. And it's usually very primitive. It's very simple. It won't be something really elaborate. Like, I fear that others misunderstand me in certain situations. That's too wordy. Think in terms of something a 6-year-old would say. I'm stupid. I'm dumb. I'm weird. I'm ugly. Something. Now, you may intellectually know that that's not true. But this is something, remember, the purpose of the shadow isn't that it's a real thing. It's a distractor. And what the shadow does is, when in doubt, when something bad happens, or when circumstances are overwhelming, it gives us a reason or a boogeyman to blame. So people that are overweight, I've dealt with a lot of them, and this is their words. So they will say, such and such happened, in their words, because I'm fat. Okay, well, it sounds kind of harsh, but they label it as in, this happened or that happened if I just wasn't overweight. If I just wasn't overweight, this wouldn't happen. Or I don't get dates, or people don't like me, or whatever the thing is. And where I saw this with them is there would be some that would lose like a lot of weight, and something bad would happen. They didn't get the job, or they got turned down by a man. And when they would come talk to me, and I'd ask them, why do you think it happened? And then they would say, I remember one lady in particular, she's crying. She says, because I'm fat. And I gently told her, I said, you can't hide behind that anymore. I said, that doesn't fit anymore. But she was so used to going to that, because what it does is that if I could get rid of this shadow, people don't call it that, if I could get rid of this fear, things would work out, whatever the thing is. But the reason your brain picks it is because it's not broken. See, with her, once the weight went away, what will happen is if she's not careful, she'll pick a new shadow. She'll pick something else, something to explain it, because that's more comfortable than actually dealing with the real problem. The real problem for her, sometimes we get rejected. Sometimes we're just not a good fit for someone. Sometimes it's nothing we did wrong. Sometimes bad things just happen, and it's painful. But rather than deal with that pain and accept it, what can I learn from it? I want to blame it on something. Again, it's common. We all do this. This is how we make it work for us. One of the women I was telling you about, one of her fears, as we explored, was ugly. That was her shadow, that I'm ugly. Now, she wasn't ugly. She got lots of dates. Dating was pretty easy for her, but her fear was that she was ugly. And we go back to childhood as far as where that came from. And so what she was doing a lot of, so when we have a shadow, we try to prove it's not true. So she'd been trying to prove it's not true. Well, when you're in high school, you're a girl. What's one of the best ways you can prove to yourself, quote, prove that you're not ugly? Yes, sleep with boys. Have sex with boys. Boys like that. Boys will tell you how pretty you are. And she had been doing this for 15, 16 years. She'd slept with a lot of men, and she couldn't get married. Let's let that sink in for a second. She was doing all that she knew how to do. And it wasn't like she was like sleeping with every man. But because she had this fear of ugly and she wasn't dealing with it, she didn't want to see it. And because she didn't want to see it, she was not going to let any man get close enough to see it. She wanted it, and she was terrified of it at the same time. The problem what most of us do with our shadow is we do things so that we don't have to look at it. We do things to constantly try and prove that it's not real, prove that it's not who I am. And in doing that, what happens is we create a buffer or a wall. And that wall is what gets in the way with men. That wall actually may keep you safe, but it actually dims your glow. And you, as a woman, that you really naturally glow unless stuff gets in the way. Most of the time when I'm talking to women, I'm not telling them to be something else as much as what's in the way. What can we declutter? What wall is there around your heart that if we could remove that, then would see the natural side of you that's actually very appealing. So for the one with ugly, I asked her this. I said, would you be willing to try something new? Okay. I said, for 1 week, I want you to give yourself permission to be ugly. And then she looked at me with eyes wide open. So I kept talking. I said, if you really were ugly, you would do something to fix it. If you had a deformed nose, you would have fixed it. I said, but you can't fix a problem that doesn't exist. If you keep trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist, you keep trying your whole life. And you'll get exhausted and frustrated because you keep making something up. I said, I'm not worried about that. I said, because it's your shadow, that's why I know it's not true. Your brain would have picked something else. The brain picks that shadow to give you something to always work on. And it gives you something to always work on that isn't broken. That's the loop. So I don't know how much of that she understood, but she knew me. She was willing to trust me, or at least try it. And I said, I want you to ask this question. What if, no matter what I do, I'll always be ugly? That one I could tell. She just kind of recoiled. I said, do you feel that do you feel that in your body when I say that? And she says, yeah, my stomach. Okay. I said, so it's just an experiment. I said, are you open to trying it? I said, you can always stop. If it gets too overwhelming, just stop. It's just an experiment. But I said, the only way it works is instead of fighting it, just ask the question. So she does this. We went into a little more detail. She comes back in a week and she says to me, Bob, it's not working. She says, I feel worse. Yes. I said, would you just for my sake, can you just try it 1 more week? Because I would see her like once a week. And that's okay. If you don't want to pass that, that's fine. But just 1 more week, please. She was fine. She tries another week. She tells me she goes to this big church. And when she's there, she's wearing, I forget what she's wearing, but she's no makeup, sits away from her friends, and, just doesn't want to be around anyone. She's not feeling awful, but she's feeling kind of blah. And afterwards, some of her friends come up to her and they say, wow, you look great. And in her mind, she's thinking, what? She doesn't feel great. Remember, she feels ugly. She feels bland. She feels like boring. But the look on their face, they're not goofing around. They really mean it. And her head's kind of spinning. She walks out of the church, it's a pretty big church, and 3 or 4 men individually chase her down the parking lot, literally, to get her phone number. Again, no makeup. She's not trying to draw attention to herself. Then she comes into my office. She's not mad, but she's flustered, and she's like, what's going on? And of course, my eyes get bigger at that point. I'm like, oh, and I'm afraid that like something bad has happened. And then she tells me the story, and I do everything I can not to laugh. And what she's flustered with is this what I have to do to get men because this is exhausting? And the other is this makes no sense to me. So here's what happened. When she did that and gave herself permission, but you have to go all in with it, the wall she was erecting, she's been erecting for at that time 15, 20 years, started to come down. And as it came down, she started to glow. And that, ladies, that's what you do naturally. That's not something I or anyone has to teach you how to glow. You just do. And as she did that, these men noticed and they felt it. I know it sounds hocus pocus. I've got more, and if you all want in the comments, I can give you more stories and different videos, because this is not the first time I've heard this. And we even created a program called the Campfire Program where we go through this with women, and it's, some in-depth. It's not really complicated as much as, but it's experiential. And then I hear these stories from women. It doesn't happen all the time. Now, what it's not is it's not a laser. It's not something you like turn on and off. It's more something you decide whether about being authentic is what you want to be, because that authenticity is what men find appealing, and men can feel the difference. Men can feel it from across the room. Doesn't happen all the time. Some men are not going to pick up on that frequency. Some are. Those are the women that have done this are the ones that I told you about that have gone to Starbucks. Times I remember one was all sweaty, and was the one that came in and was telling me about men that just, oh my gosh, they're fighting over like helping me order. Because it's just an excuse, I can tell, to get my attention. But she was not in the mood necessarily to flirt. She was just there to get her bagel, I think, from Starbucks or whatever she ordered. So how does this apply to you? My offer to you is, if you will first I can help you with this if you want, but take a look at, and you have to maybe take some time, what's your shadow? And one of the ways we find out is, if I said, if this was true, or if I called you this, if I said you're mean, you're ugly, you're stupid, one of the ways you'll know you've hit it is you may feel it in your body, but it would be like kind of one of the worst things someone could call you. Remember, because you fear it's true. Now, you may know it's not true. That doesn't matter, but you fear it's true. And then as you're noticing this, would you be willing to embrace it? What if that was true? And I'll close you with this story where this happened for me. Some of you have heard this. When I was in graduate school, my father, I took a class, abnormal psychology. And then right after that, I took a personality test to get into graduate school. And when it came back, it said, you have narcissistic tendencies. And I'm like, yikes, because I'd just taken abnormal psych and I was thinking the worst. So I tell one of my friends, she was a girl, and she was like, oh, don't worry about it, Bobby. That's not you. That made me feel a little better. Then after school got out, went home for the summer. I was telling my mom, a week later, I was there having lunch in the kitchen. And she says, oh, Bobby, that's not, she goes, that's why I don't really pay attention to those tests. That's not you. I don't see it that way at all. That helped a little bit. And then my dad came in. He would come home from the office. He would come home sometimes and eat lunch. And I said, Dad, I took this test. And I told him, and I said, the MMPI said it says I've got narcissistic tendencies. And I never forget, my dad said, clapped his hands. He said, that's great. He goes, I'm the same way. And it broke, because I realized it didn't matter what that test said, is that it didn't change who I was and who I could become. And being able to accept that meant that what I was afraid of, because I'd always been worried about being arrogant or condescending, or I'd seen people like that. And I remember how relaxed it felt. So that's my offer for you, is to play around with this. Again, reach out to me if you've got questions about this. But when you do this, I've heard so many women talk about the results. And the last part is, you won't feel more confident. You won't feel necessarily more empowered. What this does is you will glow regardless of how you feel, regardless of if you think you're having a bad day. So it's kind of hocus pocus, I know, but you'll be amazed if you're willing to try this.